What's up, basketball coaches, players, and fans? Welcome to season 2 of the Pass First podcast, where we share our knowledge of the game. My name is Alex Engel, and I'm here with my partner, Augie Johnston. We hope you're able to take something away from today's episode that'll help you on your basketball journey. Today, we're going to get into the world of scouting, and specifically scouting opponents, to help you gain an advantage whenever you play your next game. If you've been enjoying these episodes and listening on iTunes, on Spotify, or watching right here on YouTube, please make sure to like and subscribe. And don't forget to check us out on Instagram or Twitter, which will be right here at the bottom of the screen. So without further ado, let's get right into today's episode. All right, welcome in, everybody. Thank you guys so much for joining us today. As we said earlier, we are here with season 2, and we're going to jump off season 2 by talking about scouting, all the details that you may need to know if you want to be a good or create a good scout on your opponent, which can really give you a huge advantage. The world of scouting your opponents is very important. And I think if you're not doing that, you're actually lowering your chances to probably win games and be successful. So definitely something I strongly think all coaches should adopt, no matter what level you're at. So let's kind of get this started. And I'll ask you here, Augie, what are the 3 main types of scouting that you can think of?
Yeah, so the first one that most coaches haven't been able to do since COVID came is live scouting, where you're actually in the gym. You might be filming and got your little notepad there doing some scouting actually live. Next one would be just using film to scout, and this is probably the most common way, and that's why coaches really value getting game film on their opponents, because you can learn a lot from the film. And then the last way would be if you weren't able to get film, you weren't able to go watch live, but you did have maybe season stats or something like that of your opponents, and you could put together some sort of a scout for your players just through the stats.
Yeah, and I think over the last maybe 10 years or so, maybe even 15, probably about 10, with the invention of things like Huddle or other film sharing or even just YouTube, film has really risen to the top as probably one of the most common ways to scout opponents. I think teams still do live scout as well, obviously, like in a non-COVID year. Teams still live scout. I think especially maybe coaches that have been around for a little longer, they're more used to doing that. And then I would say using stats is probably the least common, I guess you could say, because we're going to talk about some of the details of why, but it's just not as common to only use stats as probably people can guess. You're only getting part of the picture if you're doing that. So when you are scouting and looking at other teams, no matter what that format is, what are you looking for? Let's start specifically with the defensive side.
Yeah, so the first things as far as what I'm checking on what they're doing defensively is, are they pressing? So that's the first thing I want to know. And so you can find that in a game film pretty easily. If you only have one game film, you might be wrong on that. And this definitely does happen a lot where you think they're going to do something. Oh, they play zone. And then all of a sudden they don't play a minute of zone against you. But yes, pressing. And then, what kind of defense do they play? Man to man? Do they play zone defense? And then it's almost like you take the giant pool and you kind of whittle it down. So now we're talking about, oh, they play man defense. Well, okay, do they, play pressure man? I want to know if they're really pressuring the ball and pressuring everything, denying all passes. Because, if that's the case, then obviously in our next practice and preparation, we're working on, back doors. We're working on, stepping over the high leg on the guy to get open, because this game, it's not going to be the same as last game, because this is a pressure defense team that plays full denials. I could talk a lot. There's a lot of other things too. Maybe, something else would be, are they forcing baseline or playing more like pack line? Like what's their level of pickup? Do they pick up at half court? Do they pick up at the 3-point line? Do they pick up full court? And yeah, those are kind of the main things that I would definitely look for.
Okay. And now let's flip it from the defensive side. And I think you did cover a lot of the main stuff there. Let's flip it to the offensive side. What are you looking for on that end?
Well, there's a lot. That's probably the time where I would spend most of my time. But I'm trying to see like what's the most common plays that they're running. If they're running, certain sets often, then those are the sets I'm writing down. And then, most teams have like their main offense, their main man offense. So if I can figure out what their main offense is, everyone, there's only so many. It's hard to find one that's like, whoa, that guy, I kind of made that up. I've never seen that before.
Mhm.
They're running flex, they're running, Princeton, they're running European ball screen, they're running motion. Those are kind of the hardest ones, I think. When you see a motion offense, you're like, dang, what do I need to do to, blow this, to scout this? Cause there isn't, a lot of times. Um, but yeah, those are some of the things. Obviously, out of bounds plays, we're scouting those. Um, yeah.
I think, or I don't know if it's exactly the same, but I feel like oftentimes for me, one of the toughest things when I'm scouting or prepping for a team is if they're running something either on the offensive side or the defensive side that like we almost never face. And what I mean by that is like last year, I remember we ran man plays the whole year, right? Like in the preseason, I was like, okay, prep for man, prep for man, prep for man. And especially for me, it was my first year coaching girls, and I was used to only coaching college guys, which basically most teams run man all the time. And so we get through, and like the first 4 or 5 games, like every team plays zone the whole game, And I'm sitting here like, what the heck? And I just didn't know any better, but it hurt us because I had spent time going over our zone plays, but not a ton because I didn't think people were going to play zone a lot. And what I found, at least on the girls' side, at least here, I can't speak for everywhere, but at least here on the coast, is so many teams just run zone. And so if you spend like 80% of your time prepping for man stuff and then you face teams that run zone, if you're not ready for that, it can really throw you for a loop because you should get open shots on a zone, but if you're uncomfortable, if you're not hitting them or you don't know where to go, it can be tough to score. So I know for me, that was just when you were talking about looking at all the different things. That's one thing I'm always looking for. It's like almost the first thing on the defense. I'm like, are they running zone? Okay, then I've got to prep zone all week because on the girls' side, it seems to be such a big thing. Do you find the same, or most of the boys' teams run man?
It's definitely a lot more. You see a lot more man. Yeah, for sure. But as far as when I do see a zone, like in a scout, when I'm scouting a team, like, oh, they play some zone, like there's also a level of, I don't just check to see, oh, they play zone. Okay. So I need to run, whatever zone offense I want to run against that. I always look like too, like who guards the high post? Does the middle guy come up? Because if the middle guy comes up and guards the high post, then all week in practice, we're working on high lows because that's kind of what you give up. If your middle guy comes high, like there's more danger at high lows. I'm looking at, the bottom, if it's a 2-3, the bottom outside guys, are they flying around and uh, guarding the wings, or are they kind of like sitting back and guarding more of like short corner and stuff? Um, and yeah, and do the top guys, how do they guard the high post? If they guard underneath on the high post when the ball's on the wing, then you can like screen that guy in. Our top guy's open. So definitely, I always look at like how they're guarding too, and even in the man stuff too. Like I said, with the pressure, are they pressuring? Um, like how do they guard on balls? Right, is another huge one that I always scout. So, oh, they switch all on balls. Okay, well then in practice we work on leg whipping after the screen, or opening like a door and really sealing that guy so we can get mismatches. We work on the high low. We just work like just different emphasis on different plays. Like we run like a spread ball screen, which is just like a ball screen at the top. Point guard comes off, and then it's a roll. The big man rolls, and then a guard replaces that big man from down low and comes high. So if teams are switching, then we're going to move that screen from at the top of the point all the way over to almost the sideline, so that when the point guard comes off and they switch, now the point guard has a big on him with more space to operate. We can there's more space for the kickback, for the high low. So just stuff like that is also like, you got to get, I think, a little bit deeper than just figuring out, okay, I mean, a lot of times it is just like, do they play zone or man? But like, I know when I have like a big game, then I want to know like more than that even. So yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, it's not always that deep, but sometimes it is.
Well, yeah, I mean, all those little things are little advantages that you can get in a game, like you said, where maybe it's a big game, it's a game where the competition's even with you, or maybe even a little better than you. You need every advantage you can get. I think you could probably get away with not necessarily getting that in depth against teams that you're quite a bit better than. But even there, you just never know. You're risking coming out lackadaisical, if you're not really prepared for them, and then that's when upsets happen. So But I get what you're saying with that. Now, what about the personnel themselves? Do you do much scouting of the individual personnel?
At this point, it depends. Like we play a team, it's almost the same thing where like I know like it's a really good team, it's a must win for us. Like, yeah, we'll go pretty deep into the personnel if I know it. In this area, I've been able to see a lot of the players grow up. We've been playing against them for years. So, we played a team recently where I literally personally knew like half the team that we were playing against just from playing open gym ball and stuff. And like my scout on them was pretty in depth and pretty good. I think it worked well for our players because they have a really high level shooter that I knew about, and he didn't hurt us at all shooting. They had a really good point guard that I knew he was good. He still hurt us because he's so good, but and then they had a really good big, and the big hurt us too. But I feel like he didn't. Both those players didn't hurt us as bad because like of small little things like he's only shooting with his right hand. Like that's kind of the personnel or the scout that I want on personnel. I want to know shooters. I want to know guys that are all right hand. And if you know a guy is a really good player and he's all right hand and you force him left the whole game, that can really pay off.
Hmm.
So yeah, definitely personnel wise, I like to create like a Google slide presentation or something like that. I like to see if I can find a photo of them, on Max Preps or something, put a photo on there. And this is all stuff that I've gotten better at this year. I mean, in the past, my scouts were not very good, but this year, maybe because we had more time or maybe because we were playing, no one knows this, but we played the same teams 2 times in a row this year. So it was almost like football, right? And you guys did too, right? So it was almost like scouting for football where you can do a little bit more in depth.
Hmm. Yeah, and just covering back on some of the stuff you were saying about the different personnel, I think you have to at least know, like, you got to at least know the basics of who their best shooters are, who their leading scorers are, maybe ideally who their leading rebounders are, because you want to keep them off the glass. Um, that's one that I look at a lot because I'm like, if we can keep them off the glass, we're going to give ourselves more advantages. Um, but it also depends on the level that you're coaching at and what you have to work with, right? And I know, like you were saying, that like you got to make a Google slide, right? And that's actually pretty creative. But if you're at a higher level school, like for college or above, you've got different systems that you can just put film up and have video clips of every kid. So you might have that ability to do that. Or if you're at a high school that maybe doesn't have a lot of film or doesn't have, maybe the teams don't use Max Preps or whatever it is. Max Preps is not required in high school, so teams don't put their stats up. So now you don't know who their leading scorer is, and maybe you're only going off film. And like you said, if you have one game film and one kid goes for 30, but he averages 5, you're like, oh man, that guy's going for 30, but he could have just had a hot game. So it's sometimes hard, and you're just trying to collect as many pieces of information as you can to create the picture, and the picture's never perfect, but it's like, if you can get it close, you give yourself a better chance of knowing what the game's going to look like. And I think that makes players more relaxed, because nobody likes going into something and they're like, I have no idea what this guy can or can't do. But if you're like, oh, I've already seen this guy, I feel prepared for them, then you're more comfortable. I think you're more confident in the game as well.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And it is at the high school level here, like I'm not, going to be able to break down all the clips of that player. Although with Huddle, I mean, it is possible to do that kind of stuff. But I think
A lot of work.
it's a lot of work. And also too, like I'm a little bit in the camp of like, sometimes it's overcoaching. Like who really remembers when they step on the floor? So I think maybe the main goal should be to like come up with like 2 or 3 things that like they do that you want to like eliminate. If it's too many, then it's just like they're not going to do it. It's just you're going to get frustrated, or one kid's going to do it. Like let's say it's just, I don't know, some small detail like, oh, and when they I don't know, I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but like, oh, when you set a down screen, they're going to slip through it here, not here. So make sure your angle is like this, like such a
Mm-hmm.
small little detail. Like, no, just set a good screen like we
Yeah.
normally always do. Um, then, like I said, one player might do it, one player might not, whatever you want. And then there's a miscommunication or something that's just like overcoaching. So
Yeah,
there is that side of it, I think.
for sure.
Um, but I do think that, yeah, like I want to know if, okay, let's say they run flex. Okay. I want my wing guys to recognize my guys that are guarding the wing. I want them to recognize that there could be a flex screen coming through on that backside that's wide open. You might need to, like, instead of being in a denial, like, you should probably just open up and just be big right there and, make him throw it to the wing and just close out instead of letting the flex cut for a layup. Like, just little things like that you can take away. I know in a game we played recently, they scouted us so well. We run one play a lot, and they denied it every time, or they tried to deny it every time. And so the second time we played them, I'm like, all right, this is just going to be called the name of the play 3, and this is automatic backdoor. It's automatic backdoor. And so we try to do things like that. Like, they scout us, we try to scout them. We know they're going to switch all screens because they scouted us and they switch all screens on this specific play. So we'll come up with a counter where it's like, okay, if we call it this, then you're going to leg whip on the switch and we're going to just throw it inside for a layup, stuff like that. I think can help you too.
Yeah. And kind of going back to your point about overcoaching, I had a coach who I remember we used film a lot, and he was like a young coach. He had just finished playing, I remember. And he used to watch film, and he watched film a lot when he was a player as well. He was a really good player. And I remember him saying, I watch a lot of film, and I think film is good, but even there, I think sometimes it's overkill, because when you start watching the same thing so often and you're like, okay, this is their tendencies, like, oh, he goes left every time or whatever. Sometimes you get robotic and, like, you start looking at the people like they're robots. Like, well, he only goes left. And then you get into the game and he goes right by you on the right side one time and scores a layup, and you're sitting there and you're like, what the hell? And it's like, well, they're still basketball players. Like, yeah, maybe are there players that literally can only go one direction? Yeah, but most players still have the ability to at least go back the other way. They just don't do it very often. But if you can't just give them like a wide open lane to the basket. And so sometimes you become so caught up in the film, like, well, the film says, and it's like, yeah, but the film isn't playing the game. The film is giving you an idea of what they usually do, but you got to be ready, because if he goes back right, you got to be able to cut him off. Otherwise, it's going to be a layup. Or, I know this has happened so many times. Like, oh, they're a non-shooter, and then that kid comes out, hits 3 threes. And you're like, what the hell, But it is what it is. Like, sometimes the team gets hot and they play out of their character, and you've got to be able to adjust. So I agree. Overkill can be bad on the other side too, because then when it doesn't work out, you like collapse. If you get so caught up in it has to be this way, that when it's not working your way, you can't think of how to adapt sometimes. Anyways, I don't know if you had anything to add there, but
Yeah, just like a lot of the coaches that I've had in the past that, like, didn't do a lot of scouting and stuff, like, they would always say, like, we just need to worry about us. We don't need to worry about them. Like, if we do what we're supposed to do, then it doesn't matter what they do, And I do agree with that too, to where, like, in the end, it's like, what's your rule? Like, how are you guarding ball screens? Like, oh, they said a lot of ball screens. We needed to do you really need to trap it, or do you just need to do what you always do and hedge? Or do you need to, like, do something different, or do you just need to do what you've always done and do it well? Like, and same with, like playing against switches. Like, do you need to change anything? No. What you need to do is just teach your players how to play against switches, right? And then they'll do it naturally, like, within your offense. Like, I remember when I played in high school, we ran like a motion offense with a lot of screening, and it was almost like a flex offense, but with way more freedom. And he taught us, hey, if we play against teams that switch, just do this. Like, and it was just like, yeah, leg whip and seal your guy. Or if you're coming off the screen and you switch, you can curl it. If that guy aggressively switches, you can curl it. He taught us, I can't remember, a few things. Anyways, set a screen open to the ball, like, just right footwork. And so when the teams that we played would switch, he didn't do anything. We just ran the same offense, but all of a sudden now we're just, like, countering their switches, and we did good with that.
mm-hmm.
And that's anyways, that's just my rant on, like, yeah, if you teach your philosophies, and if you have philosophies for every little thing, and your players understand what they're supposed to do, then, I mean, you don't really need to scout as much.
Yeah, I think I do agree. I think that you got to have a balance. Personally, for me, I think there's got to be a balance of both. Like, you've got to be able to scout, but you got to be able also trust and know what you're doing, and find a kind of a happy medium between the two of them. But let's talk a little bit about, because I know we've talked about, looking at offense and defense and players and all that stuff. Now let's talk about the three different types of scouting. What are some of the advantages and disadvantages of live scouting? Let's start with that.
Yeah, so I think some of the advantages of live scouting is you can see the people in real life, um, and not just on film where you can't really tell. You can see a lot of X's and O's on film, I would say, but you can't really see personnel wise, how big and strong this guy is, how aggressive he is, how high is his motor, how is he a hothead, those kind of things. You can see live. So I would say those are some of the advantages. Disadvantages is really just, unless you're sitting there filming, which I've seen a lot of people do too, which is probably good. But if you're just watching, then you kind of got to rely on your memory, which is tough. And I've done that before. Actually, I've live scouted and not filmed and just tried to take some notes. And like my notes when I got home, I was like, it was like 3 bullet points. Like they play zone,
Yeah.
so that's definitely a disadvantage.
Yeah, like you said, the fast pace of the game. I think live scouting is like when I was at Cuesta, we used to divvy it up. So one of us would take like the offense, one would take the defense, and then with the coaching staff, and then that way and then one of us would just kind of do overall, and that way we'd get a piece of everything. But if you're doing it all on your own, I mean, if you're really good at it, if you got a really good eye for it, you could probably get a lot of stuff. But like you said, once a play happens, if you don't have that photographic memory, or if it's a really complex play, like you're not going to remember exactly what they did,
Yeah.
unless they run it multiple times. So I think the advantage of, like you said, film can be deceiving sometimes. So seeing in person what they really look like does give you a better overall feel. But on that flip side, you've got to be quick to get stuff as it comes out. So then let's talk. And I know we kind of talked about film while we were talking about live scouting, but what about film? Advantages and disadvantages there.
Well, film's pretty much the ultimate because you can rewind, you can watch it 10 times, you can literally sit there and count which play they run the most. Um, Disadvantages, kind of what we said earlier, is just you're not gonna be able to see like the pace. I think a lot of times you might watch a film and somebody be like, a team, let's say a team wins by 30, and you're like, oh wow, they're really good, but then you can't really tell that the team they're playing against is just like a younger team, or like a team of all freshmen. But when you're live, you can definitely tell that.
Hmm.
So that's I would say disadvantages.
Yeah, and that's I think just an important piece on scouting in general is who are they playing against?
Hmm.
If they're win by 20 and the team they play against is 0 and 30, then it's like, okay, well, that doesn't necessarily mean they're really good. But if they lose by 5 or 10 and they played a team that's like 21 and 0, it's like, okay, well, that doesn't mean they're necessarily bad just because they lost, because it's the competition that does matter, and that is important. When I try to get film, I try to get it against better teams because I want to see how they play against a better team. But sometimes you don't always have that luxury. So yeah, I agree with those. And then I know we talked a little about stats, and I'm just kind of throw it out there, and you can tell me if there's anything else you think of. But stats are, to me, like the most minimum level of scouting, and that's like if you have nothing else to go off of. And it's better to know who their leading scorers are and who their leading rebounders are, or whatever. Who probably, whoever has the most assists probably is their point guard. So you can get some stuff from that, but it's just so basic and generic, and it doesn't really tell you what they run or really what the personnel do. You don't know if that person averaging 20 is under the basket for layups every time, or if they're shooting, mid ranges or whatever it is. And even there, sometimes the stats aren't complete. Like I know when I was looking at some teams earlier to scout them, and I looked on Max Preps, and they had stats up, but they had it for 3 games. They only had 3 games of stats in the whole season. It's like, okay, that gives me a little bit of an idea, because probably over 3 games, the leading scores are going to be the same people, but you never really know. Someone could have came out and started hot, and maybe they're not playing as well anymore. So it's hard to tell. And one other thing I wanted to throw in here, although I guess this kind of ties back into the film, is when you do get film, I think you want to try and get the most recent film possible, because in a normal season, it's 4 months long. So if you're playing in February and you've got film from November, that team may not look anything like they did in November. So I think it's important to try and get the most recent film.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I sometimes you can't get film, so you have to rely on, and this is I guess like the middle ground of like a film from the year before, and like
Yeah.
is it the same coach? okay, it is. Okay, well, their chances are they're running the same stuff, but you could come out and totally swing and miss with that, and then, be totally different. I know we do a lot of different stuff year to year. So, but yeah, I mean that even is something you can try to find. Yeah, and also too with scouting through the stats, I would say it is valuable to figure out who the shooter is, right, and who the rebounder is and stuff. So there is value there, but it's just not a full scout. I mean, that's like almost like a AAU summer scout or something. Where like, okay, the shooter is, who the point guard is, and that's all you really need. That's all you know. So just go with
Right.
that.
Yeah, it's definitely the bare minimum there. Um, okay, so let's one last question here, and then we'll get out of here. How much do you change your approach? Let's say you get a really good scout, right? You got film, you got stats, maybe even multiple films, or you've seen them live. You know their personnel. How much do you change your approach based on, what you found out from them?
Yeah, it's not really about changing our approach, I would say it's more like finding out what we do and finding out how we can maybe tweak it, or what we should do out of the library of stuff we do, what we should do most of against them in order to have success. I think to how to put the right players, like for example, personnel wise. Okay, we have a 6'3" shooter on our team, um, and he's going to be guarded by a 5'9" player. Like, okay, he never really posts up, so I might just move him. Our shooter never really posts up, but I might move him into a spot, like he might be the screener now, where he's going to roll so that we can get him the ball inside against the 5'9" guy or something like that. I wouldn't say like, oh, we're going to put in a new play to get him the ball. I would just like move him to a spot where he could get it inside, or defensively, if we know they have like just like a semi decent point guard or something, that we would like, okay, well, instead of picking up a half court, we're just going to pick up full court the whole game. Or vice versa, they have a really good point guard, we might be like, okay, you're not playing a lot of help tonight, you're just denying him the whole game, don't let him get it, stuff like that. So yeah, I would say we don't change our approach. I'm the kind of coach that I put in an offense versus a 3-2 that would also work against a 1-3-1. I put in an offense that works against zone 2-3 zone. I put in a press, and we have an episode about this, right? All the things you need to put in.
Mm-hmm.
But all that stuff is already put in. So when it comes time to play a team that all of a sudden runs a 3-2, like we just make sure we practice that again and go into the game.
Yeah, and I think generally my approach is the same. With I try and teach them a little bit of to cover every potential scenario when you're in your preseason and stuff, so that we have things for all these different scenarios, and then maybe the week before we play that team or the days before we play that team, we just practice those skills and or whatever schemes a little bit more. Um, the only time that I think you start to switch stuff up and maybe look at different things, at least have something new in, is if they just have a player that's like really out of the ordinary. Um, and maybe it's someone that's averaging like 30, and it's like, okay, we might have to double them. Like we might have to double them all at all times just to get the ball out of their hands. Or like for us, we played a team, or there's a team in the area that has a girl that's like 6'4", and like we don't have that type of size, and most girls teams don't have that type of size, and it's like, okay, we probably need to double her every time she catches, and normally we wouldn't do that, but I can't expect my 6 foot or 5'11" post player to hold her down when she's giving up 4 or 5 inches. That's tough. So just things like that, those type of players. But do most teams have that type of a player? No, most teams don't. So you can probably stick to your guns most of the time. And I think even when you play against teams with those types of players, you can't just abandon all of your basics, but you should at least have something in to switch it up if like it's not going your way, or maybe start in something different and see how that goes, and then you can always go back to your basics. Just something else that I was thinking of, but otherwise I generally I agree with you on that.
Yeah, and there's this conversation can go so many ways, because there's so many different ways to prepare for a game, and every coach would do it differently, I think. And like if you're playing a team that can't shoot, you might just run zone. You might be like, oh, we don't run a lot of zone, but this game we're going to run zone, and that's your scout. Like, okay, like for me, if I see a team that has a good one-on-one big, a good point guard that's going to be hard for us to contain the whole game, like that's when I know, okay, this game we probably are going to play some zone because we're not going to give up we're not going to let the point guard go for 30 and the big, we're going to contain those with our zone. And so, yeah, it's just those kind of things that like, there's so many ways to scout it. And that's the kind of the fun part, right? Is as a coach, you got to make that decision on like, can we do something different today that's going to allow us to beat a team that's better than us, or allow us to ensure that we beat a team that's not as good as us, to make sure we beat them by more. Because you can like that, you can get a point differential by having a good scout, I think.
I agree. Yeah. And I think the main thing, if anyone takes away something, is just find some way to prepare your team, and the level that you go to prepare, I guess, kind of depends on yourself, what availability you have to things like film or stats or even the live scout. But if you at least are doing something, you're going to give yourself a better advantage. And, find something that works for you and that works for your team, and different teams have different things. If you've got a team with a really high IQ, you might be able to give them a little more. If you've got a team that really doesn't have a super great collective IQ, you might have to dial it back a little bit, but you still want to do something, because if you don't prepare at all, I really think that you're doing your kids a disadvantage, and you're just less likely to succeed, because, good teams scout, and that's just the bottom line, is good teams scout. So anything else you want to add in here before we get out of here?
Nope. No. I think it's all covered. I mean, there was a lot of stuff that we didn't cover, but like I said, this is super in depth. One thing that we didn't talk about is OBs, and that's one thing that drives me crazy. I always scout the OBs. I'm like, we're not getting scored on an OB, but it still happens. So.
Yeah, that's a good point. And true, if you can not lock down a couple of their OBs, like you said, that 2 points, 4 points, close game, that makes a big difference. People harp on like missing a free throw to lose a game, but an OB can be just as important if you don't get it down. So,
definitely.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining us in today. Like we said, we just started season 2. Can't believe it's already been a year. Episode 1 here. So thank you guys so much for joining us. If you like today's episode, make sure you like and subscribe either on YouTube, on Spotify, on iTunes, wherever it is that you're listening in or watching. We do come out with a new episode once a week. We appreciate you guys very much, and we'll see you in the next one.